to the How Could You podcast. I'm Lauren Tocci.
And I'm Ryan Tocci. And we's a be doing a podcast today, Lauren.
You have just killed the entire audience. You can't start out by talking like the Binks. This is a Star Wars episode. That is the most divisive character in the entirety of the franchise. And you're going to quote Jar Jar at the top of the show?
Jar Jar Binks is an underappreciated character in the Star Wars
canon. Oh my god. You know what? We can talk about that when we get to the Phantom Menace, but I feel like starting the episode there, we've lost our audience.
See, this is why I'm so scared about this episode. Out of all of our episodes, I got a bad feeling about this.
There you go. See? Han, Lando, Luke, that's where you start an episode.
Fair. That's fair. All right.
Well, welcome everyone. It is International Star Wars Day, or otherwise known as...
May the 4th be with you.
And we thought the most appropriate way to celebrate this week would to talk about all things Star Wars franchise, sticking with the film canon, which we'll get to in a little bit. But that's going to be the subject of our podcast episode today.
Such a loved, franchise, but also much debated, much questioned, much loved. I mean, you could put every adjective into this and
much maligned.
Yeah.
Well, and I think what you're speaking to is the fact that, so this is a franchise that there's no denying that people from the original 3, where it branches off, so you get the prequel trilogies and then the sequel trilogy. And I think one of the really interesting things is that people own this franchise in a really deep way in their bones, and they will debate and defend which ones they think are the best movies, which is some of what we're going to be doing today. And because I know there are aspects of it we don't agree upon, that we slightly differ. And I think one of the wisest things I've heard recently is this. It was actually today in a class I was teaching. And a student said to me, we were talking about Star Wars, because I always show Star Wars in my class on May the 4th. Throw the lesson plans out for the day. I'm fine saying it.
Why didn't I have you as a teacher?
But so I let my students fill out like a Google form as to which film they wanted to watch. And at that point in the day when I had the student in class, Revenge of the Sith was winning. And he kind of groaned when I said Revenge of the Sith was winning. He was like, I was hoping Empire was winning. And so we started talking about it. And then like 3 or 4 students within that kind of circle, they started like debating about it. And he said this, he was like, what is it about Star Wars fans? Why are we so unkind to each other? That is literally what he said. And we talked about it like because exactly all the reasons you're saying. You love and attach onto these stories. And the cool thing about this franchise is I think you can attach on to any part of it and feel it that deeply. Mm-hmm. Because, as I'm sure we'll get into, the prequel trilogy for a very long time, I mean, so much so, there's an entire documentary called The People versus George Lucas, all about how much the original fans of the original 3 Star Wars films hated the prequel films. But now... and we've seen this with our nieces and nephews. I've seen this with my students. There's this resurgence and kind of this kind of redemption arc for for the prequel trilogy of kind of like, no. These are actually good Star Wars movies because I had a kid say to me, I'm not even lying about this. He was like, what? I like the part about the trade disputes. It's cool to see the inner workings. He literally said that. And the kid retorted, he was like, oh, you were a 10-year-old who likes trade disputes? And I was like, you know what, knowing this kid, I totally see that he would have liked the trade disputes. So it's just a really interesting, but I think that's the cool thing about it. It's all that love and passion that people bring to it. It's just sometimes we're not very nice to each other about it.
Oh, yeah, and I think, and kind of getting this out of the way at the top of the show, and it's something that I know I've talked to you a lot about. I've gone down some rabbit holes recently. There is some dark fandom out there, and there's a lot of hatred, and it's disappointing. I think we've heard recently there's gatekeeping on the fandom, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Who's a real Star Wars fan? Who's not a real Star Wars fan? There's a lot of hatred towards, kind of direction things have gone, and choices that are made. The term, politically correct and wokeness and those types of things, that there's a lot that people have had some really visceral type feelings on.
Well, and what's just so disappointing about that is, a franchise wanting to exemplify and respond to the times it lives in and wanting to address concerns, and then all of a sudden it gets much maligned. I think, I look at it like this. I think there are... what I think gets muddied is you can not like the new trilogy. Like, that's completely fine.
Absolutely.
I think what you're talking about is, like, yeah, there's you fell down some YouTube rabbit holes, like, watching, like, people who are commenting on Star Wars in, like, really negative ways and really not liking some of the direction, not liking certain characters for, like, really strange reasons, really unfortunate reasons. And I think that's, like you said, and we'll be playful here, the dark side of the fandom. Like, it's not, I think your average Star Wars fan really likes debating this, probably has an affinity for one set of the trilogy or another, and feels that way because, like, I think we all grew up, depending on what trilogy you grew up with, we all grew up kind of playing with these characters in our minds. So when we get to re-see them again, we kind of have this set of expectations of what that story could potentially look like, and I think that's why we all own it so deeply, and I don't think it's like one set of the trilogies is necessarily so much more Star Wars than the other. It just depends on what you grew up with. And, like, you know, it's kind of like the old Ewoks thing that people talk about. Like, what age were you when you saw Return? It depends on how you feel about them, the Ewoks.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of it. And I started the show talking Jar Jar Binks, and I think that's another example kind of this. You know, and listen, I fully will admit that I've had a moment or two through my enjoyment and fandom of the films that I went a little off, you know, an end that I didn't, you know, love.
No, because there was one of the films that came out, and I'm sure we're going to get into this as we start talking about the episodes, that you and I so sharply disagreed about our feelings about that film.
Yeah.
And it took you a while, I think, to reconcile some better feelings about it, but even when we watch it, I still see you kind of twinge at parts.
No, and I think there's something I wrote down, and you kind of actually just alluded to it as well, but there's something I wrote down at the beginning of the show, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of my notes when we started watching the films, and I wrote it 3 other times as I did it, and in the end, and this is something I think everyone should take. I had to do it, and I do believe it's release expectation and release ownership. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what, as fans, we have to do to appreciate these films. I'm not saying I agree with you what you said. You don't have to like them. I mean, there's going to be things that we're going to talk in this that we do not like about the films. But you got to release that expectation, because you had these expectations of what you were going to get in the prequels, and then expectations of what you wanted out of the characters that you love so much in the sequels. You have to release ownership, because these are not our films. We were not the ones that were chosen to guide them to their next spot in the story. So it's not our story to tell. It's our story to come along with and enjoy. We don't have to like every path it takes, but we also have to remember at the end of the day, it's not our ownership to determine what is, you know, where it's going and where it should end.
You can't see it, but I just mouthed F yeah, as Ryan was saying. I was like, yes, I agree 100%. So, wait, hold on. I agree 100%.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I think it's, as we now go and kind of get more, and that's kind of the, you told me not to use this word, the housekeeping, you know, and I think that's the thing. What we're going to get in this show is, this show is not meant to crush these films. We're going to have some things that we're going to say we dislike them, but this is supposed to be fun. We're going to talk about the films and what we love, because at the end of the day, I think you're going to agree with me, we love all Star Wars movies.
Oh, clearly. And this is the thing. And when we talked about this episode, it's like, and even when I was taking notes as we were rewatching all 11 films, I was just like, here's the thing, like, yeah, there are definitely things I could criticize, and maybe that episode comes at some point. Maybe next year around May the 4th, we'll maybe do a Revenge of the 5th and, like, feel, like, salty and, like, talk down notes at the start, but this is a fan appreciation show. And with that, so we are going to take this through its timeline order, not its release order. There's a lot of debate of which way to watch it. You know, I think there's arguments and merits to watching it in its release order or watching it in its episodic order. To me, this is where I want to shout out. There's a YouTube channel called Always Believe. 2 people, Ash and Brian, huge Star Wars nerds. No. They live out in California. And last year, if you followed us on maybe our personal Instagrams, you may have seen this. We had done a Star Wars marathon where we watched episodes 1 through 9 straight through, stayed up for 36 hours, however long that takes you to do. We were very tired by the end.
Cosplayed in our home for every, I think almost every trilogy.
Every trilogy, yeah, every trilogy. So like
you had a different themed snack for every film.
For every film, different snack. For every film, a different drink. Every trilogy, we had like different cosplays or like Disney bounds, if you're familiar with that. And it was a really great experience because, like, I will say this, if you've not done that yet, watch the Skywalker Saga. I'm just talking about the 9 episodes, not the Star Wars stories. Because I think it can solve a lot of problems that I commonly hear people talk about, and problems I had with the series as a whole, like where I'd go like, well, I don't know if I like that in the prequels, and then I had like watched an episodic order, and I was like, oh, you can attest this. By the end of Rise of Skywalker that weekend, I was like crying because I'm like, this makes so much sense, like because I was forced to watch it as one continuous story, and you'd be surprised how that continuity works so well on things that were not made to be that contiguous.
I 100% agree with you. I 100% agree because it's when you watch them in order, which we just did again for this, we just didn't do it straight through like we did with that.
Because that requires like at least a day off.
So we kind of started
work.
on a Thursday, a couple of movies here, and then did a lot. I mean, there was a lot in but we just didn't do the overnight nonstop. But watching them in subsequent, numeric order really adds something. And this time we did all 11 films.
Yes. So we're going to go film by film. We're going to talk high notes, low notes, things we like about the films.
Well, before we get there, though, I want to know from you.
Yeah.
How did you get into Star Wars? Where is your entry point?
As much as I love Star Wars in this moment in my life, it's hard for me to exactly recall like where that started. Like the immediate thing is my brother showed me the movies as a kid, and I loved Return of the Jedi, and I loved Star Wars. But if you remember in like the mid 90s, like Star Wars was not at its zenith. And then in 99, Phantom Menace comes out. And those films are, as we'll talk about, like, there's some feelings about those. But I'll say from my teenage years through my, I guess if you want to call me an adult, calling this my adulthood, my passion and fandom for Star Wars has grown exponentially. I always loved it. But I loved it in that way of like, yeah, I love Star Wars. Like, I love Indiana Jones, but this has like reached a fever pitch for me, especially since The Force Awakens came out. And I would have said, oh no, I'm like a diehard Star Wars fan. But now I'm like, you weren't yet. Now you are.
Now you've gone all into the table.
I'm all in.
Yeah, no, I can't.
I am Canto Bite all in.
Just gets bigger and bigger every year, and I love it. I'm here for it. I just love your cosplaying, or not really cosplaying, but more bounding
Disney
with
bounding,
it.
yeah.
With it, and when you go to Galaxy's Edge, your love for Galaxy's Edge.
I cried when I saw the Falcon.
Yeah.
I did. I cried. And sometimes, like, if I have like a bad day at work, like I come home, I just put on Star Wars because I just need it in the background. It's a very big comfort thing for me. So that's my situation. What about you? Like, where did it start for you?
Well, it's funny you said Return of the Jedi. I'm sure I've said it on this show before, but I'll say it all the time. Return of the Jedi is the first film I ever saw in the theater, so it was big with
I hate you for that.
I have this great moment with my mom of her reading the Jabba. I couldn't read the words, and I was getting mad because I couldn't see them, and she's just like, no, it's okay. I'll read them to you. Don't worry about it. Because this woman was in front of me, and I couldn't see that. But, so my family, we were really into the Kenner Star Wars action figures.
So cool.
I have a funny story where we have this like antique roll top desk, and it would close and stuff, and there was like a little gap, and I had this complete thought that, if I take this Princess Leia action figure and put it down, it will come on and through the nope, it just now the desk doesn't close properly.
And the desk is worth 10 times more than what it was worth just as a desk.
My sister Julia and I talk about that all the time because the desk just doesn't close properly. But yeah, I just I have a great memory with every one of these films that I've seen in the theater over the years. 1999, I skipped school with my friend Amy Wazakowski, and we went to go see Phantom Menace, and both really enjoyed it. That has not stayed necessarily. I remember going with my friends Paul and Mike, and we would go see the re-releases of the original trilogy, and we sat in the same kind of Mystery Science Theater 3000 spot. And then for Return of the Jedi, our friend Mike was sick. He couldn't come, so we left the space open for him. Aww. That type of stuff. And then obviously, since you and I have been together, we've seen, Revenge of the Sith, and, went with our friends Holly and Joe, and then we've gotten to see all the Disney, opening night. We haven't missed an opening night since Revenge of the Sith. Nope. So yeah, it's just, again, it just builds and builds, and I'm here for it all.
No, and I think that, I love your story with it because it's long and varied, and, there's nothing like seeing a Star Wars movie on opening night. There's nothing like the energy in that room.
Right. And especially if you get a good one where all the lightsabers go on right when it's starting.
Hell yeah, that is always the best. So, lightsabers up, everyone. Let's talk about episode 1, The Phantom Menace. 1999, as I incorrectly could not remember the year, and I should have because we've been significantly talking about this. Phantom Menace.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about the high points of it, but it is a tough one to start off with, and that's the only difficult part of doing it in this type of order, because obviously, New Hope is so beloved, if we started it off in release order, but episode 1, I think it's the best way to start it off, but it does not start off in the highest note for us.
Well, now, and here's the thing. There are things that I actually really like about this movie, and, multiple rewatches and rewatching them in episodic order, I think, can help with some of this stuff, but I'll say this off the top. I think it's really smart to start the story with Obi-Wan, because you have your connection point. You're getting to see young Obi-Wan, finally getting to really see Obi-Wan's story, because it's this figure that's so important to the original trilogy. But, how much time do we really get with him? He comes in to kind of drop some information and then gives much more clarified information later down the road in, Force Ghost form. But you have this kind of opening. You have Qui-Gon Jinn, played by Liam Neeson. I honestly think you fix this movie by really just making it about the two of them.
Yeah, but if you don't do that, if you don't do the Anakin aspect of it, that's where we're all leading towards, right? So we need to have, Jake Lloyd.
No offense to Jake Lloyd. It's not his fault. It's just, I feel like they unfairly... That's the problem. You unfairly set this kid up to have these really cheesy moments. And honestly, here's the thing. I have a feeling if the first time you saw us when you were a kid, you probably loved The Phantom Menace. I could see the attraction, because here's the thing. There are aspects of this, the things that happen in this film that I'm very intrigued by. I'll say it. You started this out talking about Jar Jar Binks. I would say if the Gungan City was makeup and sets, that would be one of the most beautiful locations in a Star Wars movie, because it's gorgeous. The problem is it's heavily CGI'd, which already differs it from the original trilogy in that we're not having practical effects, we're having CGI. So that can make people feel a little disconnected from the world. But, world building, this movie does that well. I feel what these locations are.
There's a lot of cool to this film. And like I said before, I remember coming out of it really enjoying it the first time I ever saw it. It's weird because it's probably the Star Wars film I've seen the most.
Really?
Yeah. I have no way to be
weird.
100% about this, but it's one of those, it's on a lot. It's one of the films that, because of start and restart of releasing in the theaters and different things like that, I've just seen it a bunch. It's worn down for me over time, because when it doesn't hit, it's not good.
Oh yeah, you look in pain when you're watching it.
I was falling asleep this time watching it. But there are moments, like you said, and I agree with you. Your sentiment, I completely agree, which is, if it was just a Qui-Gon and a Obi-Wan film, all about it.
Oh, this becomes people's favorite
Star Wars movie. And I'll actually also say, and this will be something that gets brought up in the next two, I think Natalie Portman is by far the best. This is her best of the 3 films, and I think she does a great job.
Oh, I kind of think I already know where you're going with that, and I think I'm going to agree with you. Because I think I can kind of see...
It's not going to all be her fault.
Yeah. Some of that is, Lucas, wanting to get poetic. But I think the thing is some of the high notes that I like, if we can talk kind of top notes of this film, is, you got to talk about it. Duel of the Fates. Yeah, that lightsaber sequence between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan.
Save the entire film itself.
It really does, because what they do with Darth Maul is something that I don't know that is always done super consistently in films, or super even consistently in Star Wars films. They really build the looming presence of Darth Maul. He's peppered in just the right way. It's kind of like a Boba Fett, leave him wanting more, but he's peppered even better than Boba Fett's peppering. I've said pepper now a lot. But what I like about it is he kind of looms, and when you have that first sequence between him and Qui-Gon in the desert of Tatooine when they're trying to leave, like that immediately feels like really cool, because even that sequence, and I think you can easily forget that sequence happens because of the Duel of the Fates later on, but it's like a really interesting moment and exchange, and also it's finally that breakage point of like, if I have to listen to Watto and say Bulba or like, and the pod racing and yippee, like one, and no offense to Shmi Skywalker, but she kind of annoys me too. Like, I'm just ready to be
man.
so mean. It's so mean. I know. It's nothing against
Remember when we said we weren't going to be...
Oh, I know, I feel bad. No, it's nothing really against Shmi, I guess. Like, it's just...
There's not a lot for her to do.
No, and
they don't give her much with it.
I think that's actually kind of my problem. I almost wanted a little bit more with her, but I also think that... So I would say the sequel trilogy was willing to kind of get in the muck a little bit more, whereas I don't know how much Lucas really wanted to talk about the fact that Shmi's a slave. Like, I don't know how much I think he wanted to say it and move on. I think a later Star Wars film or director maybe takes a little bit more time with that. But like, here's what I love about this. You set up something that I think is so important to the character of Obi-Wan. He is someone who is intensely hopeful and balanced about life. Like when he talks about like kind of the symbiotic circle of life when he goes down to the Gungan city, like, and then the other half of him, which is pure, unadulterated sass. He is the sassiest Jedi that has ever existed. He is like, his side eye is legendary. Like, Ewan McGregor's portrayal of Obi-Wan Kenobi is probably one of my favorite things across the films.
Ian McGregor looks like he's just smirking half the time. And it's
It's
not a
great.
bad, it's like a great character trait. It's just, he looks natural in that role, and that's a really good thing.
Well, and here's, like, I mean, you know, so we're talking about, like, the Duel of the Fates, but, like, you 100% buy, like, why he's a Master Jedi, even though at that point I think he's not to have gone through the trials yet. He's still in training. He's got that stupid braid to prove it. You know, and he's not there yet, but like that immense, like really intense, like battle sequence that happens, like you really get to see Obi-Wan fully flesh out to understand why by the time you get to episode 4 and he just force ghosts right out of that battle, he's like, peace, Darth Vader, I've had enough of this noise. Like, you kind of go, like, you've gotten to see the build up to that because of this film, and I just feel like when that happens now in episode 4 and you rewatch it, you're like, you've got all that Ewan McGregor behind completely.
You. I agree. And I think you were talking about Qui-Gon and played by Liam Neeson. He does just a fantastic job where you want more of that character throughout the entire series as well, and how he plays that.
Well, and I think, like, too, there's so much importance to that Qui-Gon Jinn role, because I think it also gives you like another dimension of the Jedi, because that's like something we don't know. Like, you know Obi-Wan, and you know Yoda, and you know Luke, and that's it. But now we get to kind of see that whole Jedi Council and what it looks like in the heyday when things are more polished, aspects. Now, granted, obviously things on Tatooine are never good, but like in other parts of the Republic, like, you know, there's a little bit more thriving. Yes, there's trade disagreements. But other than that, like, you get to see this very different version. You get to see the Jedi in their heyday, or, I mean, I guess at the start of the decline of their heyday.
Yeah.
But you get Mace Windu, who's incredible.
He the more I watch these films, the better that character gets. Because
he started awesome and then only gets more awesome.
Samuel L. Jackson, I mean, obviously Samuel L. Jackson, but he just plays that character perfectly. He does a fantastic job and really builds up to, you know, the finality of that character in these films. And
I think too, like, you know, you get all these like kind of moments in the Jedi Council. Again, it's like that wanting more thing, because there's actually a point. Well, I'll have to say this. There are two things that I noticed this time. One thing that you pointed out, and I really hope it's the case. If we go back to Tatooine for a moment, you pointed out you think you see a doll of someone in the Skywalker house.
Maz.
Go back and watch episode 1. There is a shot where there is a doll in the background. It looks like Maz Kanata.
It's actually in the foreground.
Oh, it's in the foreground. Yeah,
when
you're
Anakin's
right.
walking into the room. But yeah, it really does look like her. And I don't know if this is something that's readily out there. It's known. We had never noticed it before, but really looks exactly like her, which is an interesting, you know, kind of aspect to that character, which I think is cool.
And the second thing to connect worlds, because you said that and I went, oh man, wouldn't that be beautiful? Or wouldn't it be beautiful if like low-key Disney Plus just digitally added it in, waiting to see if any of us noticed. Like, and see if Maz, like, oh my gosh, those Maz kind of added her in. But there was another moment.
No, they never tinker with these films. You gotta keep
them
in their pristine, flawed and unflawed way, right? I do kind of going back. The one thing, the good and the bad of these films is, like, again, when we were talking about when it hits good, because that first 10 minutes is really terrific.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and it's exciting, especially, you know, thinking about people that had not had these Star Wars films, did not know if they would ever get more Star Wars films, and then you're going into these films for the first time, and you get that first 10 minutes of them coming in and trying to have this, you know, talk with Viceroy and, you know, and being, you know, put into a trap and fighting that off. It just brings that excitement, and you have Qui-Gon trying to come through the blast doors.
Oh, which is incredible.
Although there's one thing, and I'll fully admit, and something I should have said right up front, I love these films passionately. I'm a huge fan of them, but I am not an Star Wars encyclopedia. I get character names wrong. I sometimes forget characters. I forget planets. I mean, I was terrible at history, so trying to remember all of this is just not going to be my strong suit. So if I do throughout the entirety of this podcast, I do apologize to those that are really know this stuff, and I always admire that. I know you're much better with it than I am, so it's just kind of one of those things that I really wanted to kind of get out there as we kind of go. And I am a big fan of the films. I don't have a lot in the world of the books or the games or the cartoons.
Yeah, and the expanded universe, the paratexts that come with this, like, we didn't approach that because to try and watch those in preparation of the podcast, and this is already going to be probably a supercharged episode just on going through these 11 films.
Right.
So going back to episode 1 and kind of closing out, I will say, I mean, obviously we've talked about Duel of Fate seems to be the best part. I think honestly one of my favorite moments is with Qui-Gon. Actually, I'm going to bring this back really quick because I think Qui-Gon is going to have an importance coming up. Because when he comes back and he is trying to advocate for why Anakin needs to be trained, but at this point he's too old, which makes sense because when you see the Padawans later, they all look much younger than like that character is supposed to look at that point of the story. There's a line that gets said to Qui-Gon. They say, "Do not deny the council, not again." And I thought to myself, oh, that's like one of those moments in Star Wars where you're like, oh, are we ever going to get that side story? Like, what did he do? I think that's going to be about Grogu. I'm calling it. I'm saying that's how they work, that Grogu was in the Jedi Temple this whole entire time. I think Qui-Gon had Grogu, and I think then someone else had Grogu. I'm saying it's going to be a Grogu thing. I'm calling it here. You heard it here first. I have no basis other than I heard it and went, is that about Grogu? And I'm like, there's no reason why that would be the case, but it's just something
I'm trying to think of the timeline on that, right? Because Mandalorian takes place in between Empire and Return. Am I correct on that?
Yep.
Okay. Gotcha.
And think about the slow pace at which that species ages.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be 50 at that point. So yeah, that would definitely... We were talking a lot about ages as we were watching this.
Because there's been a lot of discussion of, like... Because I've heard that before, people talking about, are we going to find out that Grogu was at the Jedi Temple when Order 66 was enacted? Like, there's all sorts of cool stuff with this. But I think, honestly, my favorite, like, Qui-Gon moment is that when he kneels down, when the barrier shields go up when he's in the battle with Darth Maul, and, like, he kneels down to prepare... And you realize it is literally just one movement, unfortunately, that catches him off guard, that disables him enough that, like, Darth Maul's able to succeed. And then I love the way Obi-Wan charges into that second part of that. Like, he, like, jumps up. Like, this is, like, a hyped-up Obi-Wan. But it's, like, you can tell even at that, like, he has watched his master be cut down, but it's not in anger. Like, he does it out of, like... there's like a different gear. Like, whereas Anakin, I think you would have seen him attack in anger. I think Rey, you would see attack in anger. Luke, Obi-Wan's got this whole other level where he is hyped up, but he stays calm enough to, like, take...
see Luke later on. I mean...
Well, yeah, like, you see so much anger in those, like, battles, but, like... And I think this is one of the hard things about this movie, because we're talking about Duel of Fates, and there's this horrifyingly annoying droid battle that's going on in the midst of this. And that's partly because I just hate the stupid foot noise those droids make.
Those are the worst droids ever.
They're terrible. They're ineffective. They're annoying. I want to drop kick all of them. But I think, like, I think that's the worth of this film, is if you take anything from this, that sequence alone, worth its weight in the rest of the film and the stupid pod races.
I mean, to me, the pros are, I really appreciate all the Naboo and Queen Amidala stuff. I think that's really done well. Obviously, Ian McGregor and Liam Neeson, their chemistry. You get one of the all-time best villains with Darth Maul. And I actually appreciate the intent of a young child Anakin. I do. So I think those are all like the really big positives you take out of this film. I think the negatives are going to be visually, the films just are off compared to the other 6 because of the choice to go a lot, with the digital. So that it just visually just is different. I mean, there's no way to get around that.
And I think the thing is, the justification I always heard is like, well, yeah, but this is before the Republic fell. That's why everything looks so pristine and otherworldly. I think it's actually a very good and analytical point. However, I think the problem is you could still do that and those actually be real sets.
No, it's because it was quicker and easier for Luke or George.
It's because he could.
And that's fine. I don't have any, I get it. It's just...
He's literally Mallory pointing at Everest and go, because it's there.
Right.
Like, that's literally what he does with that.
And then the pod racer. I cannot leave this episode without talking about the pod racing scene. And the one thing that I will say, it's my hate moment that I hate about anything in the Star Wars film is the announcers during the pod race.
And this is before they were sponsored by Disney and ESPN family.
It just bothers me because you are taking something that is such this time period, 20th century.
Yeah, it would be 20th at the time.
20th century type of... the pod race doesn't bother me. The pod race is actually kind of cool, but these sports announcers it takes me out of the film. I get so angry now every time I see it.
I don't blame you. And you do get viscerally angry every time. All right, let's move into something that's going to make you angrier, happier. We'll see. Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Your angsty teen years for Anakin Skywalker. So I'm going to start on an up note. Something that I really love, again, and this comes back to, I'm a nerd for the Jedi Council stuff. And there is kind of a walk and talk sequence between Yoda and Obi-Wan and Mace Windu when they're talking about how they essentially think that Anakin Skywalker is too arrogant to endure the trials, and they're very worried about his training. And, obviously Mace Windu and Yoda were very resistant to the idea of him even being trained, but unfortunately Qui-Gon's death puts a different burden on it. And I love that walk and talk sequence because this is where I wish the film had expanded, because I think some of the interactions between those Jedis, because one of the cool things you get to see is that not all Jedis are alike. There's a code, but they all approach and have very different sets of skills. And I think one of the really hard things is when you rewatch, you're like, the entire time Mace Windu is going, I don't trust him. I don't trust him. And then look what happens. It's this you see that because they talk about how when they go to Camino, when they talk about there's obviously this huge blind spot in the Force where they didn't know that that Master Cypher Diaz had commissioned this droid army, and because you don't know, they didn't see that. Yoda's there's blind spots in the Force.
Such a huge plot point for an off-screen character we never meet.
Exactly. But the whole thing being, which is really interesting about this, the fact that they're well, there's a blind spot in the Force, but the entire time Mace Windu's still yeah, that Anakin kid though, shouldn't we be concerned about him? It's you just, honestly, justice for Mace Windu in that way, because he's the one saying it on the Jedi Council the entire time. I mean, Yoda sees it too, but it's just a really interesting... That's why I love that walk and talk sequence so much. I wish it had been expanded by a few minutes, just so you get a little bit more of that kind of inner debate, because I think you almost get the sense that, there's this role that Obi-Wan feels like he has to fill in Anakin's life, and he does believe in him, but you even see the hesitancy in his belief in Anakin, of going, you can see that he sees what they see. And that's, the intense tragedy of this, because you can tell he wants him to have every shot to turn towards the good, but he's seeing what they're seeing with his arrogance. So I think that makes it really interesting. It's literally a 30-second throwaway scene, probably, though.
Well, but those are the important... But that's the fun part about this movie. And something that I actually appreciate it the more and more we watch it. And it's... When it hits, it is really good.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't, it is really bad.
Oh my god, I sounded like a Gungan.
Yeah.
I just went into the mic, sorry.
So, and I think that's the key point, because there's a lot, really, honestly, and it's, you take, in my opinion, you take the majority of the Anakin and the, Padme stuff out of it, and how just not well written it is, and not well acted, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm gonna come back to that in a second, because
if you take that out, there's a lot of real, because you talked about Kamina, it's my favorite scene of this film, and I love it. I love the people there. I love the reveal of all of the clones.
Yeah.
It's where we get to meet Jango Fett. I love how Ian McGregor plays that, where he's confused, and you understand that, but he's still going along because he needs this information, and just visually, it's by far one of my favorite scenes in the entire prequels. I just really enjoy that.
You do always lean in at that part, and I think actually your appreciation, it made me even appreciate that part, because I love the scene before when he goes into the Jedi library, and he goes into the archives, and there's that demon librarian. She's got demon eyes. I don't trust her. But he's looking for Kamino, and he's like, isn't she low-key kind of scary?
And when she gets mad about him asking,
she does, how dare you, Obi-Wan? But you totally get to see what makes him Obi-Wan, makes him a Master Jedi, because there's that great moment, and again, these are the moments I live for, when Yoda is training the Padawans, and he goes in and he's questioning Yoda, and Yoda says, "Lost a planet Obi-Wan has. How embarrassing!" And it's this great sweet moment, but it's also you get this this studious sense of how Obi-Wan is trying to figure out this mystery. He's not being presented as all-knowing, but he's someone who's trying to figure this out. And then he goes to Kamino, and you're right, he plays that a total boss. We know his confusion, but he plays it what? This is fine. I totally know that Master Cypher Diaz did this. By the way, we need a movie on him.
Yes.
Straight away.
And then I like the opening scene a lot, because and maybe it's not quite the opening, but it's very close to the opening, but the chase scene with Anakin and Obi-Wan after they're trying to get the person who tried to kill
the assassin.
The assassin. I love that whole scene, because I think that it gives us a lot with those two characters. It really builds up their relationship. Mm-hmm. It gives a lot of exposition, but in a really good way, in a really fun way.
Yeah.
It's by far, I think, some of the best. It's by far the best in this film. And in Hayden Christensen's defense, it is not going to be easy acting alongside Ian McGregor. So as much as he is going to be...
He's so pretty.
I'm assuming you're talking about Ian McGregor.
I'm talking about both, but definitely Ian McGregor more so.
Mary Elizabeth Winstead did well for herself.
Get it, girl.
I do. And then I love the whole bar scene, because I think that's a nice bridge with A New Hope. So I really do enjoy.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up that chase sequence, because here's the thing. I also think it sets up what the central tension is in their relationship. And you see this earlier when he's whining to Padme about this. But it's essentially Anakin wanted a daddy, and what he got was a big brother. And that is the central tension of their relationship, because Obi-Wan doesn't want to be either of those figures. He wants to occupy the role of, I am to shepherd you into this very important position you are going to have in the galaxy, and I know you're super resistant to it, but I have this, and I'll borrow from episode 1, almost like this life debt of I have to do what Qui-Gon intended to honor my master. But however, unfortunately, what Anakin was looking for was someone more like Qui-Gon, who was going to treat him like a son, and that's not what Obi-Wan was going to do. They're too close in age for that, in that way, for him to occupy that role. And his delivery and his approach are both so different, and so not opposed to Qui-Gon's, but such a different approach. So I think, when you get to see them kind of more interacting like brothers, you see them where they're at their peak, but it also is really helpful then to understand, why it's so easy for Anakin to be swayed over to the dark side, because he's looking for that father figure that he just does not get from Obi-Wan.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw a hot take in here.
Go for it.
I think Obi-Wan had his eyes on Padme too.
I'm here for it. Padme
that
girl.
first scene when they meet her again, there's a little literally going on. And I'm almost curious if Lucas decided at a later time to write that out. Like, that was the intent, that there was going to be some conflict there.
But it pops up in Revenge of the Sith.
It does a little bit, yes.
But here's the thing. I'm going to say this. You be in a room with Ewan McGregor and not have sexual tension with him. I dare you. But I think the thing is like, you bring up a really important point, because I think there is an admiration and mutual respect that occurs between Obi-Wan and Padme. I would say he really respects her warrior spirit, and which gets, really nicely reflected then within like how Leia is as a character later on. But I think he respects that so highly, and I think they are more equals. And I think that also adds tension with Anakin, because it's like, how do I have this person who I wanted to be a father figure, was really like a big brother figure, and yet he's somehow an equal with my love interest? It's a really confusing dynamic to navigate, and in that way, and we don't know what the ages are supposed to be, but in that way, Padme probably would have been a better partner with Obi-Wan than with Anakin.
There's one of the big negatives. Are
we getting to the Lake Country?
Well, the one thing we have to say is I don't mind the age difference, but by choosing to keep the same actress, it's off. It throws you off because of seeing, especially when you watch them back to back.
Oh yeah,
because you do nothing to age up Natalie Portman, nor should you have, because she is supposed to be young, obviously, but it's jarring, and that doesn't work, and then you get some really bad dialogue, and you have literally the worst line in the entire franchise about sand.
Oh, I thought you were going to do I'm haunted by the kiss you never should have given me.
Alright, so there's a lot of bad lines in this part.
And here's the thing,
or them frolicking in the field. Although there's one shot of them in the field that's actually kind of beautifully
actually really
done,
pretty, yeah.
But then you get it 2 minutes later where he's
have on the thing.
The thing balancing,
this
and I'm
is
just
so
like,
immature.
Oh my god.
But here's the thing, and I'm not going to defend Lucas's dialogue here, but here's the one thing I'll say. I think the problem is that Lucas started writing Padme and Anakin like they were in a melodrama where they were monologuing back and forth. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that in Star Wars, except in very rare occasions, there aren't monologues. There is really heavy expository dialogue, but there's not monologuing. And that's kind of the problem. That whole sequence that happens between them at the Lake Country, where it's nighttime and the fire is going, and he's having that whole monologue about like, this very existing tension between them. Like, unfortunately, it's so misplaced in a Star Wars movie. It's never how love has been expressed in a Star Wars movie. Yeah. And that would be fine. But the problem is the dialogue is not within the same movie as everything else.
Oscar-winning actress that couldn't elevate that dialogue.
No, and Natalie Portman is a phenomenal actress.
Yeah. But because at least Hayden Christensen, he was still really green pretty new, at that point.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, so it's... And then, from there, we move into, essentially we get to the clones attacking, Yeah. I am skipping a few beats here. But we get to the clones attacking, and probably one of the better scenes within the... I mean, obviously, I think you're right that the Camino sequence is probably the best sequence in the film. The only other one that I would say could top that, getting to see Yoda battle off against Count Dooku, that's pretty dope.
Completely... Like I said, when it hits, it hits. And that's another scene that's just awesome, because we've been all wanting to see that, and you finally get to see him wield a lightsaber.
And I think that's like kind of you're bringing this up, and I think it's a really important note. Like, when this set of the trilogy works, it's like, oh wow, it works so well, it makes you want to defend those movies.
I like all the Senate stuff. I don't mind it.
Oh, nor do I. I don't mind it. I don't mind films that kind of take beats at points. Like, I don't need action sequence after action sequence, nor do I think you do. I think it's telling that, because the patterning before was like, the second film was, Empire Strikes Back. And this one ends what seemingly like in a hopeful moment, but it ends with their wedding, which we all know is kind of going to lead to the destruction of everything. So I think that's telling. There's some smart choices made. It's not that there's not...
What you do, because you're going to end on a negative in the third film. We all know where that's leading.
Nothing good comes from that.
But I think this is a good moment to talk about prequels in and of themselves. And I think this is I inherently don't like prequels. I don't think they're usually... I have a hard time off the top of my head trying to think of an outstanding one.
Godfather Part 2.
Right, but that's also a sequel and a prequel at the same time, right?
Well, yeah.
So
but it's got prequel elements.
Yeah, but I'll give you that. I'm not saying I'm sure that there are some, but this doesn't. This is the problem because you put your characters in spots that we, the audience, know where everything's going, so you makes your characters look dumb in many. Like, we all know who Palpatine is, right? We all know that he's, and you're just going, how does nobody see this? Like, right? Like, there are just these moments that, because we as the audience know where everything's going to end up, it's not anything against it. It's just hard to have that same...
Well, no, I think you're completely right, because I think it's the problem of like, are you telling me no one else was suspicious? Now, granted, the suspicion does...
suspense out. I mean, that's the big thing.
Yes, and I will say... Now, the only thing I'll say is I do feel like Revenge of the Sith feels very... And we'll move into talking about Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. That feels suspenseful because of the fact we want to know how we're going to get from point A to point B, because he's like happy, he's impregnated Padme, and then how are we getting to Vader by the end of the film? Because we know that's where it's ending. You also start to have the suspicion of Palpatine. Honestly, they should have just let Chancellor Valorum stay in power, mainly because I didn't remember that was Udo Kier from Episode 1, so like, if nothing else, just for that. But I agree with you. There's a little bit of that, like, that dramatic irony. We know more than they know. But it's the interesting thing of seeing how do we get there?
Yeah.
Because that's not how the film starts.
And I think this is another moment of release expectation and release ownership, but is tough about, prequels is we've all built up in our mind how these characters got there with some things, when not everything's explained. And when you now have to explain it, you've not let up interpretation or your own type of imagination play. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes that's not a good thing. And there are moments in this, it unfortunately backfires.
Well, and I'll say this, like, one of the things, to your point, and I think you're bringing up something that's a really important way, an vantage point to kind of look at this, because like one of the weaknesses I do think within this set of films, they never show to me what is so appealing about Palpatine that Anakin is so enchanted by him. They never show that. It is something that, honestly, that would have actually helped me, because I can understand if he just started turning to the dark side on his own accord because of the fear of losing, Padme, or because, his mom died at the hands of, like, slave owners, like, that I would understand. But the problem is they never show enough to me, because and no one at me about the Darth Plagueis the Wise scene. That is literally the only scene where you could kind of go, where he goes, not by a Jedi, and you go, like, oh, okay, like, but there's nothing else to explain, like, why his loyalties are there with Palpatine. So I always find that kind of troubling in Revenge of the Sith, because then the turn doesn't make as much sense. But I will say, once you get his turn towards the dark side through the end, with the killing of the Padawans, it works.
I wrote down in my notes, we needed a fourth prequel for Anakin. And I really mean that, because I think you have him as a kid. I think you need to see him, too, as more of this powerful, positive Jedi. And we get a little more of that angsty Jedi. We don't really see him as that powerful. And then by the time we do see him powerful, he's going, completely rogue. But now the thing is, I had to remind myself there's an entire cartoon series, The Clone Wars, which does give you that. And so for me as a film, I could almost see a fourth film with him, but I understand that there are other mediums out there that you can get what I'm looking for.
Yes, and 100%, that is an incredible point to bring into the fray here of, like, obviously someone has tried to work through that of, like, explaining how we get there, so that way by the time you get to Revenge of the Sith, like, because to me there's a really great sequence in this film. I think it's actually one of the best sequences in the film, other than, like, and I'm sure we'll get into a discussion of Mustafar, but the scene that goes back and forth between Anakin at the Jedi Temple and Padme in her chambers with, like, that mournful music, and you get the sense of kind of, like, the impending doom. To me, it's one of the more emotional sequences in the film, because it's this back and forth of this person who is, like, longing and hoping that danger hasn't come to the person that she loves the most, and this other person who's having to make a decision, having to make a choice. And it's really... the music that's underscored, the way it's shot, the cinematography in that scene, I give Lucas a lot of, not that I need to give Lucas credit, I mean, it's George Lucas, but like, there's something really like meditative about that I think emotionally can kind of get you there as to what's going on. I just wish I had like 4 or 5 more scenes like that so I could understand, again, what is it about Palpatine that made you go, I have to make this change? Because why not like Mace Windu be your father figure, or Yoda, or the guy with the cone head, or the one with the tail, like any other person on the Jedi Council.
Well, most of them are dismissing him, though, a little bit.
Yeah, I get it.
No,
and you're right.
He kind of takes them under the wing, and he tells them, I mean, who's not going to follow somebody that tells them that they can teach them how to keep their loved ones alive? Especially a character that's lost everything in his life.
But I think that's, like, what makes it so sad and tragic. Like, the fact that, like, we all sit there and we know it's, like, he can't help you to do that. Like, he is playing you like a fiddle. Like, he has played everyone else throughout. Like, I mean, he's an evil genius. Like, it's just the manipulative nature. I think that's why I hate Palpatine so much. I really, like, if you don't know this, like, my disgust for Palpatine is not even just the visceral, like, oh, he's a villain. There's something that really unnerves me, which says that they're doing their job, but, like, it just so bothers me, especially that, like, that sequence when he's fighting Mace Windu and he's pretending to be, like, you know, he's saying, like, help me, don't let him kill me, Anakin, and it's, like, this whole, like, total, like, mind screw that's happening. Oh, God, it drives me nuts every time I watch it, because I think, like, I just get so invested, and I think that's the thing. I wanted that severe emotional investment in Anakin's turn earlier in the film. Like, I wanted it a few beats earlier, and it's nothing against, because I think Revenge of the Sith works really well. I think and I don't know if you feel similarly, but I'd say of the 3 prequel films, I think it's the best of that set.
I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah, I'm with you completely.
Is your favorite part on Mustafar? Do you have a favorite sequence in the film?
Mustafar is probably, I mean, it's hard to argue that that's not, I mean, that whole sequence, once Order 60, that last 20 minutes, he does a great job. Once Order 66 goes out, like, I'm invested in the entire thing. And I feel like everything's been earned. Everything's been made up of any flaws that I may or may not have found in earlier films. Like, that's just, it gives me a lot of what I wanted, and I'm invested. I'm on the, like you said, there's the suspense, there's the edge of my seat. I know where we're gonna end up, but I'm still wanting to see all of it.
But here's the thing, like, because there are surprises in that. I didn't know that Obi-Wan was going to be the one that leads him to look as he looks as Darth Vader. I didn't know that's how Padme was going to die. Like, there are aspects of this that are, like, really tragic to watch, because especially when they have that, like, they're having that conversation and you realize, like, Obi-Wan is having an entirely different conversation, but Anakin is only hearing it through, like, poisoned ears. Like, he only hears it as, this is Jedi manipulation. He's not understanding, like, if you could just, like, yes, you have done a horrifying thing. You have killed Padawans. You have tried to single-handedly bring about the end of the Jedi, which, I mean, he almost does. And Obi-Wan is still even trying to give you this redemption. Like, he is still trying to talk him off the literal Mustafarian ledges. Yeah. But he's not hearing the same conversation. And you realize just, like, how warped he is and how, like, so caught in his grief and fear that anything Obi-Wan is saying is only pushing him closer to how he was already feeling. It's, like, a really tragic scene.
What I also really like about, especially that back end, is a lot of what goes on there then I think does a nice job of, again, bridging with Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, for sure,
I think that film, by far the most, actually really helps for the enjoyment and for the story of those two films also. And some, to kind of take away from some of the negative feedback on those films.
No, completely, and I get completely what you're saying. Like, there's a lot of ways in which Revenge of the Sith can be, like, a film that you compare and kind of see some of, like, the really beautiful symmetrical things that can happen in the Star Wars franchise in turn, or mirroring things that you can see happening in some of the storytelling. You know, I even think about, like, you bring up that about Rise of Skywalker and kind of, like, this, like, how much sacrifice becomes a part of that, that section of film, like, or that section of the trilogy. You know, I think about, like, how tragic it is that, like, Yoda tells, like, Obi-Wan, like, you have to go do this, and he, like, begs him to not make him be the one who has to kill Anakin. Mm-hmm. He, like, begs him not to have to do it, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's, like, so incredibly sad. Like, he like, this... his friend has just killed younglings, and he's even at that, like, please don't make me be the one that has to do this. It hurts. That whole sequence hurts.
And I don't want to beat a dead Wampa with this,
Love
but
it.
also that the Yoda stuff too, again, really speaks to a lot of the stuff that goes on with Luke in Last Jedi. You know, of
For
his,
sure.
his perceived failure and his choice to exile himself, and that line when Yoda gets picked up by Jimmy Smits,
That's so
after
tragic.
he feels so defeated. There's so much. I really like Revenge of the Sith a lot. There's two things I wanted before we leave the prequels. I just have to say they're dumb. They're not about anything. But we also get one of the all-time best songs with Weird Al Yankovic's cover of
this here Anakin guy.
So I have to give props to that because I love it. And then two, I love that E.T. is in the Senate, or the E.T. because for those who don't know, there's a great spot in E.T. when E.T. sees somebody dressed up as Yoda and says home.
Yeah.
And I love that in some way there's a shared universe between E.T. and Star Wars.
E.T. and Grogu hanging out is the Star Wars movie I need.
Yes! Give me that. Give me that.
So moving out of the prequel trilogy, now we're going to move into the Star Wars story. And we probably won't linger here as long. But, so this is Solo, a Star Wars story, and then Rogue One, a Star Wars story. So, Ryan, I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on Solo, a Star Wars story? I know it gets pretty picked apart.
Solo, a Star Wars story is fine. And that's the best I can give to it because... it's kind of forgettable, and I hate saying it, and a lot of that comes down to two different things. Again, expectation, what we love about Han Solo. Some of what we love about him is the mystery, and so we didn't need everything explained, including his name. So some of that is disappointing, and unfortunately, just the gentleman that they chose to play Han Solo just doesn't ever get to that spot. Like there's moments where you're like, oh, I see it, but from an entire film standpoint, he's not. Who fills the role of Harrison Ford? I mean,
no one.
Right.
I mean, that's so. Here's what I'll say in slight defense of this. The thing that I love most about this movie, and I know you already know this, Donald Glover is Lando Calrissian. Make it a Lando movie. Honestly, make it a Lando movie. Yes. Have a Han Solo cameo, make it a Lando movie.
Because I will tell you I agree with you, because actually I have a whole different answer to you if you take out Han Solo from this film. I love...
Kira.
Emily Clark, I think, is great in this.
Paul Bettany's a phenomenal villain.
Oh, yeah, he's terrific. I love Woody Harrelson in it.
Great.
I apologize, I don't remember the girl. She was just in Falcon and Winter Soldier, who plays...
she plays Morgenthau. Why is her first name going out of my head on Falcon and Winter Soldier? Carly Morgenthau.
Yeah.
Is the character name in
right? That's the character.
I can't think of the actress's name.
She plays a really great part in this. I really like a
lot of great world building.
Yeah, so there's really good. And the highlight is obviously Donald Glover as Lando. I mean, I agree with you. And unfortunately, when your side character outshines everything else, it's hard to. Not
an uncommon story though in Star Wars movies, with the secondary character outshining the main. Maybe. Han Solo's not the main character of A New Hope.
I don't think he outshines Luke Skywalker.
Okay. This is about to get contentious.
Oh!
But yeah, Solo, here's the thing. I think Solo does some really interesting things with like how we can expand story and how we can expand worlds. Again, I think I'm looking for a Lando movie. I need an extension on to that because I think he made such an incredible Lando Calrissian, and I think the problem is I don't find the portrayal of Han Solo that dissimilar to Harrison Ford. There were moments that I thought actually really worked to show kind of his origin of how he develops that swagger, but I also think trying to show the development of that swagger versus that swagger just full steam. Yeah. It's a little harder to buy into for people.
it's these characters that you didn't get enough of. Lando, I want to see more of. It's why I'm excited for the Book of Fett. It's going to be coming out to Disney. Like, that's going to be a great show because there's not a lot. And I don't dislike this movie by any means. I actually really enjoy it.
Oh, yeah, it's fun.
It kind of is forgettable a little bit in the Star Wars universe.
And I think because of the next film we're going to talk about, which is Rogue One, a Star Wars story.
Right, taking a piece, you can make a prequel on something we don't have a lot of information on or a lot of really preconceived thoughts on.
And give us one of the best heroes across all the Star Wars films.
Absolutely.
Hell yeah, Jyn Erso.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, just one of the best Star Wars films.
K2SO.
Yeah, it's somebody, our friend John had said something recently where I saw where he said it's a film about working together for something bigger than yourself, and that's the whole heart of this film, and I love every second of it. And here's a film that had a terrible filming issues. Like, they had to go back and reshoot so much of it, but it just works. And like you said, Jyn Erso is an iconic character that you wish you could have more of.
But you know why you can, and I think that's what makes that character so great is because we really get, and that is the unfortunate thing, and I like John's remarks there, like, it's such an important, because that is such an important theme of Star Wars as a franchise. I often think that's why also, too, like, the prequel trilogies can feel so disconnected sometimes even from, 4 through 9, and I think that really is because what Star Wars is about a group of people banding together for a cause greater than themselves. You really have that in the prequel trilogies as much. You have the Jedi, but you assume that's what the Jedi have signed up for.
Yeah.
And with this, it's like, you get to see, well, what does that look like if they don't all make it out?
Yeah.
Like, and that's like the really hard part of this film, but it's so great. Mads Mikkelsen is phenomenal in this.
Yeah, he's very good.
Yeah.
Very, very good. It's shot beautifully. Gareth Edwards, the director of it, just does
that beach sequence.
Yes.
That beach sequence is everything.
So much with it. And there's a lot of good humor in it. I also think it fills major plot points. I think it actually gives a plot point that people don't talk about, and somebody's going to call me out and tell me I'm completely crazy, and that's fine. Like, there's so much made about how the stormtroopers miss. And I have this, but I believe it's Obi-Wan that has the line in A New Hope where they're great marksmen, and like we have this joke that stormtroopers can't hit. Well, I have this feeling that it's about the Force, and that's why they can't hit, because you usually have somebody that has Force power when that's around.
Well, yeah, because it's the character in it whose name is totally escaping my brain right now, he's the one who repeats, I am one with the Force is one with me. And it's him, because you get the sense of, like, him embracing the Force, why he doesn't get hit for a while. Oh, gosh, that character's name went right out of my head.
Give me more of that. But we do, right? That's kind of the Mandalorian feel, right? Where it's like, you're building the universe completely. And, that's why now we can see that there's so much more we can get from just this world that Lucas built. Like, there's endless possibilities of stories that we get. This one does interconnect with, obviously, the Skywalker Saga and fills that big plot point of the Death Star in a brilliant way. Yeah. And you also get the moment everybody needed was Vader, right? Like, you hate saying it, but like that epic Vader moment at the end is just vicious.
Oh, it's so
badass.
Yeah. You hate cheering for it because you're like, but wait, I've been rooting for the people he's killing the entire movie. Like, and then you watch it happen, you're like, oh yes, but this is what we always wanted to see, but I feel so bad that I want this.
Right.
Cherry Root, that's the name of the character. I don't know why that, I had to quick Google it because it was going to bother me otherwise. But yeah, I think Rogue One is like a brilliant case study for why I think expanded story in the Star Wars universe works. Mandalorian, obviously, another for that as well, and hopefully Book of Fett and the Ahsoka Tano series. But yeah, because it's something so incredible, and then it leads literally right up to Star Wars. That's it. It's just called Star Wars. Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. I don't know if this was the first Star Wars movie I saw. I know for you it wasn't. I can't remember if I saw them in order or not. Unfortunately,
No, this was the first Star Wars movie I saw.
Oh!
The first Star Wars film I saw, the first movie I ever saw in the theater was Return of the Jedi.
Oh, that was my mistake.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, it's really going to be hard to talk about this in any kind of condensed manner. This film was so phenomenal. I'm not saying anything that people haven't said since 1977. I will say, really bold to open your movie with 2 droids for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Spend a lot of time, but that's the thing I love about it. Like, I love when they get into the transport on Tatooine, and you're just in this transport, and it's just literally filled with what they had to make was like hundreds of droids that were never going to be used in the film otherwise, other than that sequence, because it just really kind of, I think, builds danger. It also builds like kind of the culture surrounding of how droids are treated. Like, we know R2-D2 and C-3PO is these kind of like precious beings that are like taken care of, and we know R2-D2 is like the truest hero of the rebellion throughout the saga. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, but also droids are pretty disposable, like, and are pretty, like, they're second-class citizens, and you just have this whole entire transport, but R2-D2, and you get the sense that R2-D2 and C-3PO are going to be so incredibly important, but it's just, like, a weird space to start this movie, considering that's probably not the first thing you'd say about Star Wars A New Hope is like, oh, R2-D2.
True, very true.
You'd say Luke, I think,
we do get
Leia.
Darth right off the bat.
Yes. I just meant more the amount of time you spend.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. And something I hadn't even really thought about, because now we've seen it so many times, you take it for granted. But he was doing things that weren't, a lot of the stuff that Lucas chooses to do comes from his fandoms, right? But he ended up turning it into his own unique vision and made it something that you always hear people talk about. It was something they never seen. Like, when people talk about first movies in the theater or first movie that just really, this comes up all the time with people that were born in that 70s, 80s era. And I would love to know even now, kids with the prequels and the sequels, if they're still having those same type of feelings about that. Those were these transformative moments in the theater.
And here's the thing. I am only going on the sample size of the students I have in front of me on a regular basis, and they are all probably trying to preen for their grade, but they wax poetic about the first Star Wars movies they saw in theater. They really wax poetic about the original trilogy, which I always find really interesting.
That opening crawl. The
Leia just like hiding behind. Yeah.
Space opera.
All right. I know this is like an almost impossible question to ask with probably the next 6 films we're going to talk about. What are some of your high points of A New Hope? Like, what are some parts that you hold on to and you're like, that to me is the moment in A New Hope?
That's a great question for a film that's so, huge in film history. But I have to go with what I think may be one of the single most iconic shots in film history, and that's Luke with the 2 sons standing. That's your hero shot. You
scruffy nerf herder. That was so my answer.
Well, that just speaks to it, right? It's just... It's a beautiful shot. We talk about these moments where we love a great shot in film, and that's it. Like, and you throw in the score of this film. Beautiful. I could talk about New Hope all day, because I think it's such a condensed, its own film, and it's just perfectly packaged.
So you're telling me your favorite Luke moment isn't, but I was going to go to Tosche Station and get power converters.
I was trying to figure out a way to do a Tosche Station Tosche podcast, but
I'll figure that out. I'll spend some time working on that.
But I love Luke's kind of... I know sometimes we make jokes, and that just happens when you see films all the time.
Sure.
But I like Luke's kind of change throughout this film. I think it is a good journey. I think you do take this kid that gets thrust into this situation and has to adapt and not realize what his powers are and what's inside him and have to step up. Something that he wants to be, but now he's given the opportunity in the worst scenario possible.
Well, and because that's, that moment of utter tragedy of the only family he's known being killed, and Luke's life is, it starts in tragedy. It's so marred by tragedy, but it's still like the most, like one of the more incredibly hopeful characters, like in the series, and I think I like seeing his development, because I think that is really nicely juxtaposed against like Han's development as, kind of rogue scoundrel becomes general by the end of Return, meaning. But also, like, I like because it's juxtaposed against, like, kind of the fully formed rebel princess badass that is Leia, because she is so, like, devout in her mission, and she is so focused, and she is the same age as Luke, but experience and different upbringings have just created such very different people, because his experiences has been he's remote. He feels like, unfortunately, like, the life he wants to live is not the one that he's in. He almost, like, there's that sense he feels like kind of the grander narrative that he's meant to fulfill, whereas Leia is living it. Like, she is in that like, she just does not know she has the Force. No, she doesn't know what her lineage is, but she is 100% living, like, her big Star Wars story.
I agree, and I think what Lucas did with that character is a real testament to him. Like, we talk about sometimes with how his characters are written, and she is a really huge heroine in pop culture history, and for good reason. She gets the label of princess, but she's a general, a warrior, a soldier.
There's that great nod in Force Awakens when Poe Dameron calls her general, and he's like, she'll always be a princess, or to me she'll always be royalty, because you realize she's both.
I love the cockiness that she has, and she doesn't. I mean, she needs to be saved, but it's not because she wants to be. It's just because of
it's circumstance.
Yeah.
Well, and you even think about, like, the interrogation, like, droid that comes in. I think they call it, like, a mind probe, I think is what they end up calling it. But, like, you just think about, like, the harshness of the experiences she's already had, and, like, a lot, and even, like, Luke, he comes in, like, very bold, like, well, I'm here to save you. And it's like, yeah, dude, you don't really need to save her in the way that you think. She is very capable of getting out of this scenario.
Another iconic shot of, I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm here to rescue you.
Yes, yeah, and, like, him with the, stormtrooper outfit on. Like, yeah, it is, and that's the thing is, like, this film is, like, essentially, if you've never seen New Hope, you've probably seen every iconic shot from A New Hope at some point in your life. And it's hard, honestly, to pick, like, most iconic moments, because isn't that just what this film is? It's the origin point.
Exactly. You're completely right. Like, you just... Like, I forget sometimes how early Obi-Wan gets taken out by Darth Vader.
Dude, thank you, 100%. Like, literally was thinking that as we were watching. I'm like, oh, crap, that's right. That does happen really early. And I've seen this movie about 1,000 times, but I don't know why it caught me so unaware. I'm like, he's gone already? Shit.
I love the cantina.
Oh, yeah, that's great. How Luke doesn't get killed, like, within 2 minutes of being in the cantina is, like, a miracle of Star Wars.
McClunky.
I will say a note on this. So this time we used Disney Plus to watch all of the films. We actually do have a Blu-ray of the despecialized.
Gotta keep that on the DL.
Oh,
That's we bought street legal.
We bought that at, like, the back table at a convention, and if you've been to a convention, you know what we're talking about.
You might want to be careful down that.
Oh, we know. Oh, yeah, that sounds so much worse than I mean it. I don't mean it that bad. It's not untrue what I'm saying. But, like, so the despecialized, it's the original theatrical cuts. Now, the version that we have is actually some filmmakers in Germany who put original reels back together. So, I mean, this thing is, like, pretty pristine. It's like,
it looks great.
It looks great.
We just, for ease, we chose to do Disney Plus this time, and because that's what most people are going to see.
And I'm going to tell you, if you've not seen the despecialized in a really long time, like, if you've only seen the souped up versions, I'd highly recommend getting yourself a copy of those, because honestly, I think made it hard to watch this version, because there were times where I was like, get that out of there, get that out of there.
It's just like, don't tinker, but I mean, it's yours, it's your playground.
It's his world, we're all just living in it. So we move into... Do
you have any negatives?
New Hope?
Yeah.
No.
My only negative, and it's nothing against New Hope, actually, it's just, you can tell that this wasn't 100% thought out, despite what everybody said. I'm not saying he didn't have an outline of what his 3 films were going to be.
Or are you talking about the mysterious, what was it, like, he's got these books that he, like...
Yeah, they're just things that...
There's so many theories.
This is always my issue when people have such complaints about the sequels and even the prequels. It's like... These original trilogy, which we're just going to wax poetically about, are flawed too. I mean, there's flaws and there are inconsistencies throughout.
Yeah.
But who cares?
Who cares? They're great.
And we also have to give props to maybe one of the most, again, iconic, non-real foods of all time. Blue milk.
Blue milk is delicious.
Blue milk is awesome.
I'm going to make blue milk this week.
Oh,
Let's make drink of the week.
Let's do it.
Drink of the week.
Drink of the week.
And this concludes episode 1, May the 4th. Join us tomorrow for episode 2, Revenge of the 5th, where we start with The Empire Strikes Back and take you through the rest of the Skywalker Saga.